where we're discussing whether a politician blocking a critic on Twitter is a violation of that critic's freedom of expression. Joined by me now are two legal experts on freedom of expression, Dr. Richard Moon, a professor at Windsor Law, and Dr. Maxime Saint-Hilaire, a constitutional law professor at University of Sherbrooke. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Professor Moon, why can't a politician just block whoever they want on Twitter? I mean, it's their account.
I'd like to sort of preface, an answer to that with a more kind of complicated. But why can't they? Well, it may be they can. We don't have that question really resolved at this point, but there is a real issue as to whether they should be able to. And it really comes down to whether we want to see a Twitter account as a kind of public forum that individuals should be able to access in some way, either as simply audience members who can see and read what's been posted and perhaps also to comment. So that's really the question. Let me just preface this by saying the fact is that our thinking about free speech, our free speech doctrine, grew up in a very different context, and we're having to rethink significantly how we understand it and how we apply it to new media of different kinds. And that's the real challenge.
Okay, so Professor Saint-Hilaire, can you respond to that? What's your take? Is blocking a user on Twitter a violation of that user's freedom of expression?
Well, I agree with my colleague that the current state of Canadian law on this is unclear. It was decided in the U.S. as you may know, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Second Circuit just reaffirmed the decision that ruled that blocking someone on his account by President Trump was an infringement of the First Amendment. I think it's interesting to wonder whether this can be transplanted in Canadian law. I think, first of all, there's an application of the Canadian Charter issue because the Canadian Charter applies to the government. It certainly applies to ministers, but the question whether it applies to MPs, MLAs is a bit more complicated. The Supreme Court in New Brunswick Broadcasting said the Charter applies to Parliament and legislatures, and this means that it also applies to parliamentary houses, chambers. But it's unclear whether or not it applies to member of parliament and member of legislative assemblies as well. I mean, it's arguably the case, but then there's a parliamentary privilege issue. So if a member of parliament or member of a legislative assembly is using his Twitter account in this capacity, I mean, the question needs to be posed, to be asked whether or not there might be instances where the Charter does apply, whereas the parliamentary privilege doesn't. And this is unclear.
I certainly read about that Trump decision. It was fascinating, although I guess the point is moot now that his account has been deleted. Professor Moon, I want to follow up on something Professor Saint-Hilaire had just said. The Charter covers government action, and Twitter is a private entity. So why does the Charter even apply here?
Well, of course, you're right. The Charter applies to government action or state action, and that given that Twitter itself and other social media platforms like Facebook are privately owned, it appears that then the Charter is not directly applicable to them. The question is whether we can see the individual account of a political actor as a state act, as a government action of some kind. And particularly if they use that, as, say, Donald Trump did, as a way of stating their positions or announcing policy in some way. But even when they present themselves as a political figure to the public world, even their image, I mean, as you described in the previous section, the idea of a politician offering a photo with family. Well, that's still, we know in this contemporary environment, in a sense, a political act. It's a construction of one's public image in some way. So it really is about distinguishing the account from the platform itself, and whether or not we can view the particular feed or the particular account as itself an act of a particular state actor.